Welcome back to our study of apologetics. We are looking today at Aquinas's cosmological argument. Now, we're not going to look at the whole argument because it's quite extensive. We're just going to look at a portion of it. I think perhaps the most helpful portion of it. And then hopefully we'll come back to the rest of it at another time. But last time we looked at, or I guess the last couple of times, we were looking at Anselm's ontological argument and the reply that Guanilo made in his Lost Island argument and how Anselm responded to that. And Aquinas's argument is in some ways a response to Anselm's argument, because Aquinas was one of those, like Guanilo, but for different reasons, who did not find Anselm's argument persuasive. So Aquinas is writing roughly 200 years after Anselm, I believe, and he says in his own work that there's a couple reasons why he doesn't find Anselm's argument persuasive. One, he says, it is not known to all, even to those who grant that there is a God, that God is that thing than which no greater can be thought of, since many of the ancients asserted that this world is God. In other words, Aquinas is saying Anselm's starting place is, there is a being than which nothing greater can be thought, right? And that being is God. And Aquinas says, well, not everybody even agrees with your starting definition of what it means for someone to be God, right? For that being to be something than which nothing greater can be thought. He says a lot of people don't think about God that way. Think about the pagan Greeks and Romans, right? They have a multitude of gods, and you can't say that God, in the way that they use the word, means something than which nothing greater can be thought. Now, Christians agree with that definition of God, but if you're trying to persuade someone who's not already a Christian or not already a monotheist, at least, they may not agree with you with the very first portion of your argument. And then the second thing Aquinas says is, even granted that everyone who understands this word God to signify something than which a greater cannot be thought of, it does not follow that something than which a greater cannot be thought of exists in reality. So Aquinas says, even if we grant your definition of God, Anselm, it doesn't logically follow that the something greater than which nothing can be thought must actually exist. So if you heard Anselm's argument and you're like, I'm just not persuaded, I don't think it works, neither did Aquinas. And Aquinas was one of the great thinkers, great teachers of the church in the medieval period. So you're in good company. But also note that Anselm's argument was significant enough that Aquinas engaged it. Many people do find it persuasive and helpful, and so if that's you, excellent. But that's Aquinas's response, and then Aquinas comes forward with his own proofs, his own arguments for the existence of God, and these are called together. They're called the cosmological argument, because and Aquinas's argument is based on observations about the cosmos. Cosmos is just a Greek word meaning universe, or world even. Someone reminded me last night, right, that world is also how that word is, I think, at times translated. So cosmos means the universe, right? We're thinking about how the universe itself communicates to us truths about God. And if that sounds strange, it's actually very biblical, right? Remember that the Bible says that the heavens declare the glory of God. They're communicating, they're speaking in a sense about God. Romans 1 says that all people know there's a God because God has made himself known through the things that he's made ever since the creation of the world. Namely, it says his eternal power and divine attributes. So there's some aspects of who God is, and definitely that God is, that he exists, that he has communicated through the creation. And so Aquinas' arguments are growing out of that biblical soil, right? And he's going to argue that based on observing the world, we can come to know that there must be a God. These arguments are also sometimes called the 5 ways, because it's actually 5 different ways that Aquinas seeks to demonstrate the existence of God. Together, they're called the cosmological argument. But again, there are 5 of them. We're just going to look at the first 2. All right, so the first one the first argument that Aquinas makes, or the first way, is called the argument from motion. All right, and so what Aquinas says here, and I'm gonna quote him for a bit, and then we'll break down what he says and talk about what it means. He says, "It is certain and evident to our senses." Again, so this is based on things we see and observe, that in the world some things are in motion. Whatever is in motion must be put in motion by another. If that by which it is put in motion be itself put in motion, then this also must needs be put in motion by another, and that by another again. But this cannot go on to infinity, because then there would be no first mover, and consequently no other mover. Therefore, it is necessary to arrive at a first mover, put in motion by no other, and this everyone understands to be God. All right, so the argument from motion is also called the unmoved mover argument. All right, so what Aquinas is saying is we look around the world and we notice things are in motion. And for Aquinas, motion doesn't just mean moving from one place to another. It also means change, right? Change is motion. Growing old is a kind of motion. Even if I don't move from one place to another, there's still movement happening in my body as I age, right? It's change. So he says we look at the world and we see things in motion. Things are moving, things are changing. And we know that things that are in motion have to be put in motion by something else, all right? The things that we see that are in motion have to be put in motion by something else. You can take as an example the little, I don't know what to call it, toy gadget, little science project thing called Newton's cradle, right? It's a series of balls that are hanging from strings, and you pull one back on one end and let it go, and it clacks into the group, and then the one on this end comes out, and they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. If you walk in on one of those in an empty room, you know that someone must have been there and put them in motion at some point. They did not begin to be in motion by themselves. They did not and cannot put themselves in motion. That's just not the way the world works. Right? And so that's the observation that Aquinas is talking about. And so he says we notice that things are in motion, they're changing, and we notice that those things that are in motion have to be put in motion by something else. And then he says, but this can't go back to infinity, right? Because then there's no one that puts something in motion that leads to the other things being in motion. And since nothing can put itself in motion, you have to go back to something that is unmoved, right? That is not in motion, but puts other things, or at least something, in motion. Right, so that's why he refers to this as the unmoved mover, right? The one who is not moved. Nobody puts God in motion. God doesn't change. God doesn't move in that sense, right? But he is the mover, right? He is the one who causes the planets to move, right? He's the one who causes motion, who puts things into motion. You might think, okay, well, hold on. Your Newton's cradle example works, right? But I can put myself in motion. I can stand here and not move, but then I can begin to move. I can walk over there. Am I not putting myself in motion in that sense? Well, in one sense, of course, you are, but not in the sense that Aquinas is talking about, because it's easy to think in terms of like a marble, right? Like a ball. because it has no parts. It's just one piece. If you walk up on a marble that's moving, you know something moved it, whether it was a person or just the force of gravity, if it's on a sloped surface or whatever. Something put it in motion. Um, but what Aquinas is talking about here is not like, can you move on your own? But even when you move, there are different parts of you putting the other parts in motion, right? So your legs can't move without your heart beating, right? And you have a series of muscles and nerves and tendons and all those things that cause that motion to happen. But even further back than that, what caused you to be in motion in the first place? Not just to move from here to there, but to have a heartbeat, to be a being with a body that grows and changes. Well, ultimately, that has to be traced back to God, right? You could trace it back to your parents, right? That's why you were born. Is because of of them, and then but ultimately you have to go back to God, who put all this in motion in the first place. So that's what he's talking about when he talks about this unmoved mover. It's not that God put himself in motion and put everything else in motion after him, but he's unmoved. He's not. He doesn't change, right? We talk as Christians about God being unchangeable, right? That God, his not only does his character not change, but he doesn't change. He doesn't grow old, right? He doesn't grow in knowledge. He's God. He's immutable is the big word that we use for that. He's unchanging. So that's the first argument, the first way of Aquinas's cosmological argument, the argument from motion. And the second one, which is also very helpful, I think, and similar to the first one, but distinct in its own way, is the idea of the first cause or the uncaused cause. And so one of the things that's been pointed out, for example, is that sometimes people will say, "Well, everything has a cause, but if everything has a cause, then what caused God?" And that feels like a question that's meant to stump you, right? But it's not actually an accurate question because it's not based on an accurate understanding of God. When Aquinas talks about the first cause, he's going to say that God is uncaused. So it's not true that everything has a cause. It's easy to say that because everything else does, everything besides God. But it's not true that everything has a cause because God himself is uncaused. And in fact, part of why that question feels like it is going to stump people, right? And how do you answer that? Is because it doesn't make sense for there to not be some first cause that wasn't caused by anything else, right? So here's how Aquinas says it. He says there is no case known in which a thing is found to be the efficient cause of itself, for so it would be prior to itself, which is impossible. Now, to take away the cause is to take away the effect. Therefore, if there be no first cause among efficient causes, there will be no ultimate nor any intermediate cause. Therefore, it is necessary to admit a first efficient cause to which everyone gives the name God. So here's what he says. A thing cannot cause itself. Again, we know this from observing the world. If we see something that exists, a car, a watch, a person, an animal, a tree, whatever it is, we know that it did not cause itself. It did not bring itself into existence. And Aquinas says that a cause precedes the effect, right? So one of the reasons why a thing cannot cause itself is because if the cause comes before the effect, then if I were my own cause, I would have to exist before myself in order to cause myself, which makes your brain go crazy because that doesn't make any sense, right? That's not possible. A thing can't exist before it exists. Therefore, a thing can't cause its own existence, right? So, um, we know that a thing can't cause itself then, and that there's no effect if there's no cause, or to put it the other way, if there's no cause, there will be no effect. So there must be a first cause that is not caused by anything. So we could, in this way, refer to God as the uncaused cause. He causes other things, but he himself is not caused. Again, this demonstrates that God, right, is different than everything else we know. Um, but it doesn't make sense that everything else we know would exist unless there was something like God that gave them existence. Um, because again, you can't just go back infinitely to a cause before this one, a cause before that one, a cause before that one. Well, where does it start? What thing exists that wasn't caused by something else? That has to be first, right? And then that thing can cause other things. So those are pretty heady arguments. You might have to think through them, listen to them, read them more than once to sort of begin to get your head around them. But once you get what Aquinas is doing, I think these are really helpful, right? They're very careful. They're sophisticated in the way they're put together, but the truths they're communicating, I think, are quite clear and in some ways quite obvious once we stop to think about them. They resonate with what we know about the way the world works and the way the world is. And what Aquinas is trying to show is if we will think rightly about the world we live in, about the things we observe, about the things we know to be true, about the things we see, we'll know that there has to be something before and behind and above all of this that put it in motion and caused it to exist. God bless.